The last question we are considering today is the role of a university-state partnership in the evidence-based business. We started this morning with a presentation about broadly the relationship between an institute of policy and the evidence-based agenda of the state, and heard a lot about the evidence-based agenda in the area of corrections. We just finished a panel in which the leadership of the state of New Jersey's criminal justice agencies talked about their evidence-based orientations today. And now to bring this first day home, we're going to talk about this new budding relationship between a university setting and a state that has needs to invest in its evidence-based practice. Our three panelists are Professor Anne Piehl, who is an economics professor on the Brunswick campus, the director of its criminal justice program, and a former professor at the Kennedy School at Harvard, and a person who's written extensively about evidence in the criminal justice system and produced a bunch of it herself. On her right is Ajania Henderson, a professor in the law school here in Rutgers, Newark, a specialist in reentry, and a person who epitomizes the role of law in producing social justice. And on my far right is Wanda Moore from the Attorney General's office. Wanda is the Director of Community Justice for the Attorney General's office, has been our champion for getting this institute started and our consultant in thinking through its priorities. And we'll talk about some of the things that the Attorney General's office is interested in producing such a partnership. Speakers will go in that order, and then I will have some questions and ask for questions.
In preparation for this panel, I've been reflecting on my experiences with evidence-based policy and practice in criminal justice over time, and while I still like to think of myself as young, I realized that I had 20 years of experience to reflect upon. Some of it with people on the panel that you had today, and I just want to commend the organizers of the panel for collecting an impressive group of dedicated public servants, people who've really toiled for years trying to make sure that criminal justice policy and practice more adequately reflects the empirical realities, the realities on the ground, and really lining those up. So I have a little bit of experience in New Jersey, but I have much more in Massachusetts, and also some with working with local jurisdictions in Boston and Philadelphia and Maryland, and just being part of the criminal justice academic community more broadly. I have four thoughts that come from my experience about what would be important for improving the use of evidence in criminal justice in New Jersey. So the first, I think, is that it's really important that the effort be institutionalized in some way, that it really needs some kind of place that's going to be lasting over some period of time. The reason for this is that otherwise, when particular initiatives or ideas or policies come up for consideration, people need to start from scratch each time. And it's such an impediment to get going. So it's an impediment to even starting sometimes. But then, once you're ready to go, it just really slows down the process. And a lot of the enthusiasm for whatever initiative is underway, it has to get directed toward collecting the data. I was on a commission under the previous gubernatorial administration that Bruce Stout staffed there, and we were charged with improving efficiency, right, in corrections. And first thing we needed was some data about what's going on at the time, and we were able to get a nice extract with a lot of work from the Attorney General's office, but it took several months before we got to that point, and so that really uses up a lot of time of people who are dedicated to an effort toward kind of data issues. And many of us in this room might enjoy that work, but other people often find that to be a little bit tedious. So the other thing is about one-shot efforts is that they don't capture many of the gains of all of that work, right? So you can put a lot of effort into collecting something one time, but it doesn't become part of the usual practice of an agency or a larger initiative so that you can update easily, et cetera. It doesn't actually help you bear any fixed costs now that make it easier to do in the future. You have to do the whole thing, reinvent the wheel down the road. So I think something that's institutionalized is really, really essential to being able to rely on evidence much more frequently and more extensively. I think the Washington State Institute for Public Policy is a really great example of this, and I've watched Steve House make his PowerPoint presentation, and it's really impressive what they've done there. What might not be so clear to others is I've really seen their purview grow over time as their capabilities did. So it started small and narrow, and they've added in several dimensions more and more policy areas over time, but also in more and more in-depth analysis. The legislature started off with small, narrow, kind of technocratic questions, and it's become broader and broader and broader over time. And I think that's because it's been institutionalized. They've developed both their capacity and their credibility. So I think it's really important that something be institutionalized in some kind of longer-term time horizon, medium-term, 5 to 10 years, please. The other point that's also epitomized by the Washington State Institute for Public Policy is it is an external entity, right? It's not a subsidiary of any particular agency. It's external, it's freestanding. In that case, it's government funded, but it is freestanding. It doesn't have any part of anybody else's particular agenda. Its agenda is to collect and reflect evidence about what's going on in the state at the time. And so I've thought a lot of times about, in my own work, why we need external entities to help with this at all. Is it enough to have agencies and departments take on the evidence-based mantle, as you saw some examples of today? And I think it is important to have an external entity, even as agencies develop more and more capacity within themselves. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is if the agency or entity has its own agenda that's only about evidence, right, they can accomplish two things. One, it often improves work across agency lines, across the different silos that occur by having somebody who doesn't have any concerns about turf or how employment or power balance or budgets or anything might be affected by going down the path that evidence leads you. And as such, it can really facilitate cross-agency collaboration. And the other thing is that if its agenda is really about the evidence itself, it can push through and carry through when there's a lot of competing pressures, as there will be at particular times, that will really push agencies to that otherwise to reduce their emphasis on those kind of topics for a certain amount of time. Another thing that having an external entity can accomplish, need not accomplish, but it's important if it's seen as neutral and credible and capable, okay? And all of those things are, I think, facilitated by having it be external. Again, external doesn't necessarily ensure them, but all those are important: neutral, credible, and capable. I think that's what recommends a university setting as one possible way to accomplish those sets of goals. It's, universities tend to have as their mission some sort of pursuit of truth and knowledge, which is terribly consistent with an evidence-based kind of mission. You want an entity to have their mission, the agenda, be about evidence. And I think you can gain a lot from a university setting. Again, it's not impossible to accomplish outside the university, as the Washington State example shows. But in a university setting, there's a long tradition of peer review, where really you have a lot of colleagues around and they provide the sniff test of what you're doing, and there are a number of people to call you on things if you somehow lose track, get too sucked into a perspective of a particular agency or a particular topic or something. You have colleagues that you're talking with all the time who are primed always to say, are you sure? Is that true? Have you considered the alternative? And I think that benefit of peer review and intellectual kind of ballast, to weight you on the other side is something that could be invaluable for producing quality work. And if it's not quality, it's not worth doing. It's not mutual in quality. The last point I wanted to really make about thinking about improving the reliance on evidence in New Jersey, but elsewhere as well, is that to get to the next level of program evaluation and policy analysis, I do think we need to improve the data that we're using. Corrections and police and other units in law enforcement are very good at counting things at a point in time, providing snapshots of what their current population is. But really what we need to evaluate programs and to really be forward thinking in our policy analysis is to be able to follow people over time, okay? And it's a little bit in conflict sometimes with the constitutional mandate for law enforcement, which is about processing particular cases and particular instances. But for us to really make progress on improving people's lives and making efficient use of our budgetary dollars, we really need to be able to follow people as they move through one part of the system to the other, or they don't move through the system, for example. And I think this is really an important infrastructure kind of question for us to develop the capacity to do this. It's particularly important in criminal justice because those involved in the criminal justice system tend to have very complicated lives and tend to be involved in multiple agencies over multiple periods of time in their life. And so it's not individual incidents. We have to watch it with people as they move through so that we can judge whether certain initiatives are working or not, or bringing in the right people or not, or mistargeting, et cetera, as Professor Latessa was talking about earlier today. I have sometimes said over the last few years that my view of IT is that it's changed everything that I do in my life. I do everything differently now in my life because of the change of the IT revolution, except research on corrections, which is basically done very similar to how I had started when I just got out of graduate school, right? It's very time consuming looking at people's rap sheets and trying to develop a criminal history from that. If you want to do a recidivism analysis, you have to draw a sample, you have to pursue another agency, you have to get them to check it, you have to then read those rap sheets almost always by hand, and it's just amazing to me that, I don't pay my bills the same way, I don't use the phone the same way, I don't drive to Newark the same way, I don't do anything the same way except what I do for my professional life. And so I think that's a challenge for all of us because, I don't want to be here thinking the same thing in 10 years.